Good morning. Bodo Aboye. My name is Baba Anthony, and I am the head Awo with Okamaso Day Temple here in Miami, Florida. This morning's Ifa Temple message titled Ifa is not magic. We need to take practical steps. This is something that's been on my mind and conversations that I've had with many others throughout my practice over the years. And one thing I am so sure about is that sometimes Ifa can feel like magic, right? It feels as if we're in a place of things not working out, and all of a sudden they absolutely do work out. And we find ourselves in a wonderful place of many, many blessings. But I promise you, in most situations, we've done the practical steps to prepare ourselves for that E-Ray. We've done the practical steps to make sure that we're moving through life as best as we can. And sometimes we're not paying attention to the details in order to catch that. So let's talk about three stories today that will help us understand the practical steps within the stories of Ifa. So the first Odu we're going to look at today is from Ika Meji, and it goes, the sharp edge of a metal spike cannot be grasped in one's hands. An avaricious person is he who looks sideways in an expectant manner. His mind and eyes are never settled in one place. A snake does not take its young with it to move leisurely around the farmland. These Rifas declarations to Kara Nasi, who shall grow old and feeble and live up to 3,000 years old. He was advised to offer a bow. So here we have the story of Kara Nasi. Kara Nasi was very, very interesting in that his goal was to live a long and productive life. He wanted to live a life far beyond that of his grandchildren. He's just, I want to live a full and long life. That was his destiny, right? And so he did many things to do that. He never found himself in disagreements with others as to not get in a fight. He never put himself in a place to compete against others so others would hate him for losing to him. He never put himself in dangerous dangerous positions or do things that caused grief in his life. And even though he did all of these things in order to set himself up to live a long life, he was still wanting to know more. So his next step was to go and see an Awo to have Ifa cast. And as the Awo cast Ifa, Ikameji comes out, and he explains to Karenesi, he says, Karenesi, you will live a long and productive life. You will see your grandchildren buried in your life. You will see far beyond your friends and family around you. Karenesi heard this information and he says, okay. The Awo explained to him that he needed to offer a bow and he needed to complete a ceremony of longevity in this particular Odu. And so Karenesi offers his bow and he does what he needs to do. The Awo tells him he needs to continue to eat good food, to move about cautiously throughout life, and to continue to take care of himself as best as he could. And as Ifa had determined it, Karenesi followed every rule of that divination to the best of his ability. And before you know it, Karenesi lived a very long, long life. The Awo said that he would see his grandchildren get buried. That was true. But it had gotten to the point to where all of those who were supposed to celebrate Karenesi in his life were no longer alive or living. He had outlived them all. So looking at this particular stories, what are the practical steps, right? Yes, we understand Ifa's messages. We understand the importance of offering a bow, right? There's a tie for us as Ifa devotees. There's a tie of in between spiritual work and doing things in the physical domain, our physical domain, that will help us live this long and productive life. So what were these practical steps? Well, first, Karen Nisi was someone who, as we like to say within my job, we focus on risk mitigation, right? That's what Karen Nasi was focused on. He was focused on risk mitigation, and he was focused on conflict avoidance, right? I'm not going to put myself in a position where I'm going to get hurt, and I'm going to avoid arguments with others. Simple, right? Practical step number one. Number two, his second practical step was to not overindulge, right? He says, he heard Ifa says you need to eat well, you need to drink well. So he ate only what he needed, and he drank water in order to support his health, right? He was prioritizing good food and water to support his health so that he can move and be energetic, not put himself in a place where he was oversized, if you will, right? Next, his third practical step, even though he was, doing the things, already starting to do the things that he was doing, he was already focused on not getting in fights and living calmly. He went to see an awo in order to have the spiritual advice be a part of his life, right? This is a must for us as Ifa devotees, Ifa and Orisha devotees. This is an absolute must. We need to seek divination in order to support our steps that we have in place to then see that Ire blossom fully. So we heard that. And then finally, his fourth practical step in all of this was that he complied with the advice. He followed the steps. He did everything he needed to do. He offered his abo, and then he lived his life. For Karen Nisi, long life was a partnership with his spiritual practice or spiritual offerings in the abo. And then what happened for him to follow up on that was that his physical discipline of moderation, of never overdoing it, well, essentially moderation and focusing on good character, allowed him to live the long life that he needed to live. So if we look at this Odu, we have to understand the practical steps that Karen Nasi took in order to put himself in a good place. One of the things I often hear within our practice says, well, Ifa said this is taboo for me, but maybe I will consume it every so now and then. Okay, that is one route to go. But then that, to me, is not living in moderation. That's not following the practical steps that are necessary to be a part of your destiny. And sometimes we avoid admitting that, hey, maybe I am doing something against my destiny. Maybe I am skipping over the steps that are important, right? Something to think about. Let's go to another story. We're going to go to the Odu of Irete Meji. Irete Meji. Let us hear this first. A bag full of cowries landed and made a ricocheting sound, and a bag full of Omokun beads landed and made a dull sound. In order for me to have rest in the future, that is why I have refused to give myself now. You no longer listen to the instructions of the Orisha. You are all in hot pursuit of wealth. The Abigba diviner chants repeatedly to the seas and chants repeatedly to the lagoons and even chants repeatedly to Oyimbo man's land. These were the messages of Ifa to Yemese Iledo, who was weeping in lamentation of her inability to secure all Ire. She was advised to offer Ebo. So here is the story of Yemese Iledo. What's important to understand about Yemese is that She was a very, very hard-working woman in her life. So much so that she was following a saying that her mother used to tell her when she was young. And her mother used to say, if you want to enjoy your life when your hair is gray, you must work when your hair is black. Powerful statement, right? To me, that symbolizes her mother preparing MSA to always plan for her future. Look for the big picture, for the point where things can calm down. Now, what's interesting to know is that Yemese came from a family of Orisha people. She was raised with these Orisha in her life. Her mother prayed to them. Her ancestors prayed to them. This was a very, very important part of her life. But what we should know about Yemese is that she was so hard pressed to prepare for her future, she started to forget everything else. She started to forget her practice of the Orisha. She started to forget her family and friends. She started to forget the rest that she needed. She started to forget all of these things that maybe you and I would consider absolutely important, right? The idea of establishing a family, the idea of spending time with children, the idea of going on vacation, maybe, right? Doing something to give yourself some downtime. The MSA was so focused on being hardworking that she forgot, her religious practice. And because of this, things in her life started to go down. She found herself very, very unhappy because she was to work, she was home. She was at work, she was at home. And it felt like she was just working from paycheck to paycheck, always just trying to settle another debt, always just trying to take care of something else. She was unhappy. So she goes to a Babalawo to seek advice from Ifa. And the Awo explained to her, he says, well, Ifa says something that you've forgotten in your life is that you came from a family of Orisha people who always gave prayers to Olodumare, who always gave prayers to the Orisha on the devotion days, who always were focused on keeping balance in their life. Ifa says that you need to maintain balance. Because you've lacked balance in your life at this point, the Orisha and Olodumare have turned a deaf ear to you. Yema say, here's this. She says, yes, you're right. I have turned myself away from the Orisha. I've turned myself away from Olodumare. I'm only focused on work, and I'm so unhappy. So it's just me. The Awo continues and says, well, now here's where you need to organize your life. You need to have your place for work. You need to have your place for spiritual practice. You need to have your place for family. You need to have your place for rest. The Awo continues, then explains the abo that's necessary for Yemese to follow up after the divination. Yemese decides, okay, I'm going to offer my abo, and then I'm going to reorganize my life. Yemese went home. She sat down. She says, okay, what do I need to do? I do not need to work every single day as many hours as possible. I need to have time for my Orisha. I need to have time for my family. So she reorganizes herself. She puts herself in the position of having time for other things. In no time, Yemese started to see the benefits. The Orisha were listening to her and allowing openings to come up into her life for her to now have better clients, to have better work, to have more things in her life so that she continued to blossom. Following along with that, she started to be happier, right? So thinking about this particular story, now we need to identify the practical steps in this story. So Yemese's mother prepared her well. Right? Think about that for a moment. She prepared her well. She said, if you plan, if you want to be have a good life, excuse me, if you want to have a good life when your hair is gray, you must work when your hair is black. That was a very important statement. That made Yemese a very good worker, right? She was always thinking about her future. Yet, it got to the point for Yemese where she forgot. She was working so much that she forgot about her ancestors, her spiritual practice, her family, her friends, everything else around her. So, what were the practical steps and what did she do? One, Yemese's first practical step was, let me switch from busy to balanced. She realized that her work, she was very good at her work, but it wasn't enough for her to be happy, right? She stopped obsessing over the work that she had done enough to remember the Orisha, to then focus on the other important aspects of life, right? That's an important thing to consider. And I didn't explain that Yemese's work was that she was a market analyst. So she used to help people to find the best deals, the best markets, where the trends were within the market. And she was, more like a consultant. And so that's how she worked and got paid. She was always focusing on doing that stuff. So as she sought that balance and found her happiness, things started to level out. She had more clients coming, but now within a smaller amount of time, she was able to give time to her Orisha instead of just trying to always find clients to work for. Her next practical step was the restoration of her ancestral practice. That's something that I think is important for many of us. Ifa and Orisha, for us as adults that are coming to this, as again, that is us restoring our ancestral connection. We need to do that in order to find balance in life, right? As we reconnect with the Orishas, we reconnect with Olodumare, Ifa, whatever you want to call it, right? As we reconnect, things will start to open up and the balance in our life will come back. And that's what we then need to focus on. Her third practical step, after she went to the Awo and found her reconnection, she offered her Ebo. That Ebo started to assist with opening the doors for the Ire to move itself into her life. It didn't do it by itself, right? Let us hear that clearly. She didn't just offer the Ebo and all of a sudden her life just changed. No. Yemese had to go through the practical steps in order for her to see the success. And finally, the final step that Yemese needed to put into place was the importance of organizing her life. So many of us are so focused on the different aspects. Maybe we are workaholics, or maybe we're only focused on the fun things of life. We take too many vacations, so we're constantly in debt. Or we are always looking to have the nicest items, or we're always looking to have the nicest clothes. We don't have balance. And so we need to seek balance within our life in order to maintain that success. So many messages within this particular story in this Odu that we must consider as we move through our days and our weeks. So now let's go on to another story, which is a favorite one of mine. And this one is the reference to Oshe Ifa. And this comes from the Odu of Ose Meji. Ose wo, it breaks into pieces. Orun wo, it cracks into tiny fragments. It is not the practice to paint dried palm fronds with camwood. These were Ifa's messages to Usanla Oshemiragbo, also known as Obatala, when going to have the hand of Ojose Osede as his wife. He was advised to offer Ebo. So here we have the story of Usanla Oshemiragbo, also called Obatala. He was at a point in his life, in this Odu, where he was looking to have a spouse that he can dedicate himself to, right? He had lived a life where he had relationships that were okay. They hadn't settled, they hadn't found their ways, they weren't supporting each other's destinies. And so these relationships just seemed to go by. And he's like, I'm tired of these types of relationships in my life. I now want someone in my life who will not only help me grow my destiny, but someone that I can love and cherish and be with for the rest of my life. Interestingly enough, within this story, in another place, another part of the town, if you will, was a woman named Ojose. What is interesting about her is that she was also in the place of looking for that someone. And what's interesting is that Ifa kind of tells us that, Ifa tells us that there's not always there's not a concept of the soulmate. It is someone that we're looking for that helps us uplift our destinies, that helps us, that supports us, that will cherish us, that will be supportive of us through our lives. And that's what Ojose was looking for. She was tired of all the men who were here or there or weren't focused on her. They had other thoughts and minds, and it was just passing relationships, similar to Obatala. So one day in the marketplace, Obatala had come across Ojose. They happened meeting. The same marketplace, this hello. Conversation hit off wonderfully. They had so many things in common. They found each other very interesting, very attractive. So much so that when Obatala got home, when he left the conversation, his mind was thinking about this woman. He finds himself in the home of the Awo, and he says, you know what? I've spent so much time in relationships that didn't work, and I never sought the spiritual support to understand if this would be a good relationship for me. So Obatala asked the Awo to cast for her. And the Awo says, this woman will be very, very good for you. She will assist you in uplifting your destiny. She will assist you in your day-to-day life. She will bring a newness to your life that will be very important. And all you have to do is, one, you need to offer Ebo, and two, you need to show support to her. You need to support what she does so that she can grow. You need to support her destiny so that you uplift her and you don't come up here and she stays down here. So you're working to lift each other's destiny together. Obatala heard these messages. He offers his Ebo. He goes home to think, what can I do for Ojose? He's already got the blessing of Ifa, so he knows this is someone he wants to marry. So he then decides, he says, I will break two kola nuts on Oshe Day, which is our day of devotion within our practice, for Ojose, in order to pray for her, to lift her up in her life so that we can both be lifted together. As they came back together, eventually they became married and lived a long and productive life together. So this particular story, as many of you may have identified already, Like, this is the story of the beginning of Osei Ifa, or Osei Obatala, excuse me, right? Osei Obatala, because he began this process of the devotion. Obatala came together with Ojose in order for this process to commence, Day of Devotion. So his devotion to his wife, Ojose, is something that we now can learn from. Well, one, before we finish up with this particular story, we have to identify the importance of Ojose or Osei for us as Ifa practitioners, as Orisha practitioners. So if that's a ceremony you're not participating in right now, that absolutely is key to your success in our religious practice. There's messages, there are things that they can save us from. So that's just my advertisement for Osei. So now let's talk about the practical steps of this particular story in this Odu. So practical step number 1, learning from the past. Obatala had made the decision that he didn't want to repeat the same mistakes that he had made in the past with other women, right? His practical decision was to go to Ifa to find out if this person was going to align themselves with his destiny, not going to, with their destiny, align themselves so that they can both lift each other up in this world. That's practical step number 1. Many of us move through life constantly in search for the one. And you may meet someone who feels like they are the one, but do you support each other's destiny? Is one doing more for the other instead of balance? Are duties between the husband and wife working together? Right? These are things that we have to understand when we come into a relationship. And this is such an important message. We come to Ifa to find out if we can support each other's destiny. And then we have to hear the message and either make our decisions to move in either direction, or, figure out what can we do. Is hope lost? Does Ifa say all hope is lost? And usually if Ifa says that, the writing's already on the wall and we can kind of see it, right? So anyway, learning from the past is the practical step number 1. That's what Obatala is teaching us here. Let us not go through the same mistakes. Let us understand how we can support each other's destinies through Dafa. Number 2, we have to understand the value of the information that came from the Awo. Obatala heard, the success of your marriage will depend upon how you treat your wife. Practical step number 2, he heard it from Ifa. And because he heard that, he made the appropriate steps in order to move forward. Number 3, third practical step, the consistency in his ritual. We all know that as practitioners, Osei is every 4 days, or as we say every 5 days technically, but every 4 days is the beginning of the new week. Obatala is on day 1. So every 4 days, we are going to give Osei. So we need that ritual practice in our life in order to make us strong in what we do, strong in our beliefs, strong in our practice, strong in our devotion, right? And this devotion is not just to the Orisha, it is for us internally. Because if we really sit down and analyze Osei as practitioners, then we understand the messages that Ifa can bring us. Whether it's, hey, listen, you need to fix your character. Hey, listen, here's how you should move through the week. All right, this is a devotion process to us. In the story, Obatala devoted to his wife, but we need to hear the message that it's a devotion process for us. The fourth practical step for Obatala is that it's sorry, lost the train of thought for a moment. It's the fourth practical step was the mutual support, right? Ifa spoke about the coming together of both husband and wife in order to support each other. What was Obatala's benefit from this relationship? Well, his benefit from practicing Ose, his devotion, was wealth, it was prosperity, it was victory. All of these things were coming into his home. And for us as devotees, that is wealth, that's our own personal wealth, that is our peace of mind, that is our victory. That part of the process is for us. And this is what we need to understand. So let's bring it all back together. As I started this conversation today, I wanted us to understand that Ifa is not magic. It will feel like magic. I know it will feel like magic, but we have to understand underneath all of it together, there are steps that we must take. It's an important reason why we say as Ifa devotees that our Ori is in charge, that our Ori is greater than any other Orisha. The reason we say that is because we have to know that it is our mind that has to follow through step after step after step. And then we allow the Orisha to come in and support us through all of this process that we're moving through. Right? And you're going to hear it in many stories. You're going to hear it in many divinations. You're going to hear it as you study. Think about the practical steps that are given to you during a divination. Do not put yourself in the place where you can do yourself, which says, well, I had Ifa cast 17 days ago, and Ifa told me I would come into wealth. Because then my question to you is going to be, what practical steps did you take in order to achieve that wealth? If you tell me for 17 days you did not leave your home, you have worked against yourself and your good destiny. If Ifa says you're going to meet a good spouse, but you go from home to work, to home, to work, to home, to work with your head down, you've moved Ire out of your life, but not considering the practical steps that you could be taking. I share this with you because this is such an important part of everything that we do. And I want to tell you, I didn't figure this out right away. It took time. And so this is why I'm sharing this message, because I want us to understand that as we hear the messages of Ifa says long life is important, then what practical steps are you already working in your mind to say, okay, how can I improve my health? Am I going to my doctor? Am I eating right? Am I moving myself? If Ifa tells me that wealth is important, then what do my job prospects look like? Am I making the money to support my household? If Ifa tells you you're supposed to have good children, and you have that are you having those conversations with your children to allow them to grow so that they can bless your life? There's so much to all of this, and I'm not going to finish this today, but I will. It's now, really inspired me to think constantly of how, when I share messages, to let me identify the steps that we should be thinking about and the direction that we should be moving. So I hope this has begun the process to help you understand all of what I'm saying today. I hope you have an absolutely blessed week. I just cast the Itadogun on Saturday, and the Odu of Ogunda Bede comes to light. So look out for those messages by the end of today, Sunday. I hope you all have an absolutely blessed week. Aboru aboye, aboshishe obuato. Odabo.